We can start.
Are we ready?
Yeah, we can start with some introductory stuff, and they'll be walking in any second.
We need to call order.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess Anderson?
I didn't run the meeting, but yeah. Call the finance committee meeting, special meeting to order Thursday, September 30, 2021, 8:30 a.m. Present is Mayor Stacy Rhodes and Councilmember Dan Epperson and city staff. Pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Got a roll call there. Public comment? Make care the public with comment. Okay, 4 minutes.
Good morning. Yesterday I came into an email that Mr. Atlan put out publicly, and he said that the city of Ione conducted a dye test fairly recently in relation to the leakage that is seen near the footbridge on Sutter Creek. I consider this a public records request for that dye test, who did it, and when it was done. Any questions?
I would submit the request to our lawyer, Sophia.
Well, public comment, public meeting,
This
but
is
are
a-
you saying you will, or are you saying I should?
You should. If you could,
I should.
If you don't already do it through the proper channels.
Yeah, this is not a public comment on this is just for the finance committee. It's not
Well,
public comment.
like I
on
said,
everything.
you might want to talk to your attorney. I will do that. But again, we will make note that we did indeed try to come to you in public and find this information
All right,
first.
fair enough. Anyone else want to comment on the finance committee? Seeing none.
I would just like to point out, it says wastewater committee on the agenda, under public comment.
If you look closely.
Oh, it does, yeah. I see it there.
Oh,
It's pretty obviously the finance committee up top. So
yeah, that's a mistake, though.
we'll make the adjustment there.
Okay.
Thank you for commenting on the other comment. There's also a comment on the finance committee meeting. Anyone? All right. On the regular agenda, review the draft operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2021 and 2022.
Thank you. So we are here today to review the 21-22 fiscal year budget for the city, operating and capital budgets. The council adopted a continuation budget, a continuing resolution on June 29th, which allowed us to continue to operate in lieu of not having a budget to submit to you that was final. So we've spent the last 3 months putting together what amounts to this year's operating budget. And we had to do a lot of work before we could get to this point. We had to finish the bank recs that were overdue. We had to begin the 18-19 audit, which had not been completed. We had to update, pay all the bills so that we could see what the actual ending balances were, which our accountant and finance consultant have spent the last 3 months doing all the bank recs, paying all the bills, balancing all of the budget units, getting the audit started. And so we are finally here today with a draft final budget for this year. So the main points to go over is that the budget is balanced. In fact, the budget has a surplus. So here's what we know and what we can tell you about the last two budgets, prior year budgets. One budget was before COVID and was before a lot of the development finally matured into occupied homes. And so that budget had a much lower revenue stream. Then we had COVID, and we anticipated huge reductions in revenue. And that was reflected in the budget the council adopted. But in reality, we did not have huge reductions in revenue. In fact, we had almost no drop off from COVID. It was very, very minor. But at the same time that COVID was underway, we were still having homes getting occupied and new units being built. And so the property tax revenue estimates are going to be much higher for this year. In fact, they are. And sales tax revenue will go up corresponding to new residents entering the city and spending money. So we're fortunate in that we have a budget that is considerably higher than the one you just saw a year ago in terms of revenue. The other piece that's interesting is that when COVID started, the departments became much more frugal. They stopped spending money. There was no travel expenditures at all in the city, so we saved all of that money. And we saved money in lots of other areas like gasoline and fleet maintenance, because a lot of people worked from home or didn't drive as much, and there was a lot of operating savings. And so when you look in the budget, we've actually carried over money due to very disciplined spending by all the departments over the last 12 months. And so the great news is we can present a budget to you that does all of the things that need to be done, in my opinion and my recommendations, having worked with all of the staff. The first important part is the operating budget itself is broken into basically three pieces. The general fund, which is the largest portion, over $3 million. Then there's special funds like the gas tax fund and the wastewater fund. They are not only self-sustaining, but they are legally required to have a completely separate spending plan, and that money is coming in from ratepayers for wastewater and coming in from the gas tax, federal and state funds, and can only be spent on very restricted activities within those funds. The general fund has been borrowing money from restricted funds for many years. 10 years ago, the council asked staff to come up with a financing plan to pay back those funds. Council passed a resolution, adopted it, directed staff. The city never did pay back those loans. We are recommending in this budget that we have a 25-year payback of those loans at a rate of about 100 and, what was it?
46.
Yeah, per year for the next 25 years to properly pay back the funds that money was borrowed from to balance the general fund. The general fund was able to stay solvent over those years, but they did it on the back of borrowing money from other funds. That's a legal practice to borrow from other funds, but it's also required that you pay them back and that you have a financing plan to do that. So that's what we're recommending in the budget, that it be paid back. And we've got a very detailed explanation of those 25 payments and which funds are owed the money. Wastewater is owed some money, the gas tax is owed some money, and so forth. The other big piece that we're recommending is that that all employees receive a 2% cost of living adjustment. The city salary ranges are not competitive in the region at all, and we have the money to do that. In my 5 months here now, it has become very clear to me that the most lacking piece to the staff is an analytical skill. And I'm recommending an administrative analyst to help all the departments with staff reports, budget preparation, monitoring of their budgets, grant writing, report writing, assisting the city manager with special projects, particularly if they come from the council as high priorities, and just doing the hard trench warfare work of writing reports and documents and staff reports and grants. Complex analytical skills are sorely needed. And right now, there's only 2 people in the entire city that can do that, and that's just not enough. So that's one recommendation. The other one is that we hire a full-time permanent building inspector / code enforcement officer. The city's already spending over $150,000 a year to do building inspection and code enforcement. A lot of that is reimbursed anyway through development, plan checking, I mean, the developers have to pay for that anyway. And that's not really a new cost to the city. We've always paid for building inspection and code enforcement. But we're asking for a full-time permanent position because the city of Jackson has, their workload's increasing. And the individual we're using his first priority is a full-time employee to Jackson. And they are asking him to work more hours. Sutter Creek he's still working for Sutter Creek as well at 8 hours a week. Plus, our workload is increasing. So this gentleman is supposedly working over 70 hours a week to try and satisfy all three cities. And that's just not sustainable. And our workload is actually increasing. We have a meeting later today with Ringer Ranch developers. So that is still in the pipeline as well. Wildflower has still got several hundred units to finish.
138.
Yeah. And Castle Oaks is still not completely done either. So there are still development plan checks, and then there are occupancy inspections that still have to be done, and then there's code enforcement, which the police department's been doing, but they answer 911 calls before they do code enforcement, so they haven't really, it's not a priority for them.
Just a note to that one little piece of that when the road goes through and that's all final, that actually
Yeah.
frees up that front piece to develop as well, that second piece, Gary Valley's piece, so that's just kind of a note. But
Yeah.
I don't know if that's in the offing, but that's definitely one part of the little piece of it.
Right. And so we're making some other minor changes to titles. Office assistants is a very old and somewhat not kosher type of title in today's world, so we're changing that to administrative assistant. There will be a very slight salary increase. We're changing Chris's title from assistant to the finance manager, which I've never heard of and we don't know where it came from, to what he actually does, which is he is our accountant. He's our chief accountant. And we're adding a street maintenance worker to the Public Works Department, but subtracting the pool maintenance agreement because we can do that in-house if we have one more maintenance worker and save quite a bit of money on operating the pool, which isn't really even ours, but that's another story.
It's a good situation.
And we can leverage that individual to help with, right now the Public Works Department is responsible for parks and facilities, street maintenance, a little bit of work in the wastewater fund, and they do all the custodial services for all of our buildings as well, so they're essentially the city's custodians. And then all the park maintenance, so all the outdoor park maintenance, mowing and just tree trimming and everything, bathrooms in every park, and all of that is in Public Works, including Howard Park, which is a large park for a city of this size. So they really struggle with trying to get everything done with essentially 2 full-time maintenance workers. And we have money, they get paid out of the gas tax and the general fund and the wastewater fund. So we can split those costs among all those different budget units to leverage one more position. So that is the big picture stuff. Again, we have a carryover balance from last year from two places. One is we underspent. 2 is we got more revenue than we anticipated. So the city has what's called an unrestricted reserve of $845,000. That number is page 22 under budget summary of all funds. And that's probably the most important page in the entire packet, because that page tells you what our beginning cash balance is for operating the general fund budget minus the money that is held over in a unrestricted fund for council's discretion. And what do we mean by that? Well, every city in the state of California, except those that are filing for bankruptcy, have a unrestricted reserve, anywhere from 5 to 100% of their operating budget. They do that for unforeseen expenses that are not adopted in the budget. So let's say on October 19th, the council adopts a budget, and on November 1st, there's an earthquake, and there's substantial damage to the city. And the city has to spend money to save lives and property. The city can spend money by simply having an emergency council meeting, augmenting the budget, and transferring that unrestricted reserve into the operating budget and allowing the city to spend money on an emergency basis. The city can also use unrestricted funds in very difficult economic times. So if you want to balance a budget by using money that you've already set aside for an unforeseen circumstance, you can do that as well. It's not recommended unless you're really in a tight spot. And during 2008, 9, 10, those 3 years, a lot of cities borrowed money from their unrestricted reserve to balance their operating budgets to get through a very difficult recession. Some cities borrowed too much and got themselves into a situation where they owed other funds money, and most cities paid it back. I can tell from looking at past budgets that that's exactly what happened, is we were unable to balance the general fund, so we borrowed money in very difficult economic years, and we were able to stay afloat. But when things began to improve, maybe they never truly improved in Ione, we never paid the money back. And that's what we're recommending we do with that 100 and something thousand a year.
128.
Is to pay back money we borrowed over the years. And we have the ability to do that, and that's the great news, is we have that ability right now.
Do you have a list of funds that we owed money to?
Yeah, that would be on page, what page is that on? I know I saw it. Oh, it's back here. Here, let's see what page is that on. Page 9 in my packet, yeah. So money was borrowed from development impact fees. Let's see, hold on. How do we want it? The first column advances to other funds. And where the money came from. So the very first line item, impact fees for the general plan. So that was money that was borrowed from a development impact fee and went to the general fund's operating budget. The next one was another impact fee that was borrowed from fire. And then,
I think that we got that reversed.
I think it's reversed, yeah.
Paying out the advance is the one that's paying to the other funds.
Right,
So the general fund is lower on the second column.
right. So mostly we borrowed from development impact fees, some from the gas tax, some from Measure M. Is that right? That's how I'm reading that. Some from traffic mitigation, which is essentially a development impact fee. And that's over a long period of time. But legally, that has to be paid back, and there has to be a plan.
Because I know before, I mean, like I said, we're going back in time a little bit here because of other circumstances, but I know we talked earlier about, I don't know, I'm saying, we talked earlier about maybe paying off some of the lower amount of funds faster, like just getting some of them off the books. And some of them, I'm not sure if we can, before we actually had reverse, when we basically traded divorces, because some of the funds rode each other. There was a way we kind of got rid of some of that debt, at least that was the plan. I'm not sure it was exactly because of all the other complications, but that was kind of the thought going into it. So that way, and if some of the funds need to be paid back faster for political expediency, like Measure M maybe, or one of the other funds that there may be more pressure from outside, that need to be done just to make things happy or whatever, however you want to call that, but I'm not sure if that's really a thing or not, but if that's, I'm not sure what your thought on there might be.
Well, the council can, I mean, you can direct us to do any number of variations of this, absolutely. you
Are
can.
some of them just
Yeah.
like flopping?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, absolutely.
'Cause that was part of the thought before was if we need to consolidate or flop them back and forth, that way we just get a bunch of them off the books. So we have kind of a smaller number of funds to deal with, so at least we're cleaning it up a little bit quicker, but yet some of the numbers might be larger, but it's still paying it off, but it just kind of clears the books a little easier, if that makes sense. I mean,
You can, absolutely. We can, you're tying up cash today to do that.
Right.
And so, but yes, you can.
Yeah, I mean, that was just, some of the thought on that ahead of time was just to kind of, I mean, I know, because I could say when I came on, there was like a list of all kinds of stuff going on. We tried to clean as much as we could up with what we had, but the problem is we didn't have enough to really, you know.
No, we did not.
I know, we were, I mean, when I came on, we knew we were in deep trouble, it took me about 6 months to figure that out, but at any rate.
And part of the reason that we're recommending everything that we are is we are looking several years into the future as well
Right.
to try to determine what the revenue stream will be.
Because that's the problem, when I came on council, I don't think there was cash reserves, and it wasn't real evident, as anyone could say, that, you know, we were having problems, and, you know, it wasn't, from the inside out, it was becoming apparent rapidly, and we began to, I came on finance committee, we began to attack some of that stuff, some of the findings especially, we went through all that, just trying to put together a plan of solvency at some point. And then the political, with this, the economic pressure, the downturn, and I think our builders, if they wouldn't have been building, would have been really sunk. I mean, people didn't like to do that, but we still build about 100 homes a year in the middle of all that, which, if we're still migrating out here, a good number of homes we wouldn't have been building, there was just no cash flow, and that kind of kept things moving, and that's what we ended up with, I guess. So.
Right. So the forecast for the next several years is increasing revenues. Assuming the economy performs at the same level, then there will be increasing revenues. However, if the economy crashes and burns, which does happen from time to time, then it depends. If new homes are still occupied, then we will be ahead of a recession a little bit. But we'll still lose out a little bit on sales tax during a recession. And if the homes are not occupied and the population stagnates or decreases, then there'll be a serious economic decline. It also depends on property values. During the 2007, 8, 9 period, what happened was home values decreased significantly in value, and they were reassessed by the assessor, and property tax revenues went down because everybody paid less property tax. Plus, some cities lost population as people left those cities because they were forced out of their homes, and those homes became vacant. So that was the worst case scenario. So that's why we're not spending all the money. So we've left not only the $800-some thousand in the unrestricted reserve, we've left an additional $300,000. Just leave it alone, let it sit there if you need it. If revenues are lower than predicted, you're fine. You can balance the budget with cash reserves essentially.
And with those unrestricted balances, I know we have a ladder portfolio for CDs for some of our money, or if you invest it late. I mean, it seems to me we should definitely invest it, not just let it sit and rot. That's
Well,
what money values over time.
When I got here, we had $8 million in a general checking account. We were investing none of the city's money. That's just unacceptable.
I know we had a ladder
Unacceptable.
portfolio for CDs, maybe still do, Contella.
So we've transferred our money to LAIF,
Yeah.
which
I know, sometimes I know.
LAIF is an animal all by itself. So LAIF has the money of virtually every city and county in California. It's essentially a state bank.
Mhm.
It's a state investment bank. It's not really a bank. It's like a credit union. It's a state. Only cities and counties and special districts can use LAIF. No private company. There's no private equity. But what it allows is for cities and counties to essentially invest their money at extremely low risk LAIF has been anywhere from 8% a year in interest to almost nothing.
Mhm.
I don't really understand how they set their interest rates. Right now, it's
Point three?
I'm on
Point two.
here.
Point two.
0.2.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 0.2%,
You're losing money by investing in them.
which is one of the worst interest rates they've ever had.
Yeah.
But it changes all the time. There's another investment firm called Cal Trust.
And they're just slightly lower.
They're even worse than LAIF right now. See, that's amazing. So it's better than nothing, but, you know, and we don't need to keep all the money in a checking account either. So we'll invest where we can responsibly and at low risk.
That's, there's a list there, you've gone through this before. So with the interfund transfers too, is there interest on that money, or is that interest-free, or there isn't? I think it's required 3%.
You have to pay interest.
That's why I thought
Yeah.
3% is what I recall.
How much debt do we have? Loans and all that?
Well, we have an iBank loan, right?
Wastewater, something.
Yeah, with 3.25 when we started out, it should be going down.
2.7.
Yeah, that sounds about right, because it was 3.25 when I signed the paper.
So technically, your debt would be the $3 million. You owe back all those funds, which we're setting up on a 25-year plan. The other debt would be the iBank loan.
Right.
And
Just smaller.
The buyback loans like 1.5%. It's really low interest. I mean, and it actually is making us money in the long run, because we put it in the infrastructure, 1.8% interest. It would cost us more year on year if we had to do stuff, had money came in. So we got the loan, and that was when we got our first, our best rating we had for our finances. So we were able to get secure that loan to the FDA, I think it was. And then it's basically structured in the sewer bills. Basically, it's well covered. It's just a matter of if they pay it back. That was part of the plan, to try to get the state off the back. It's the line of the pond and some other things that was included, I believe. But,
Huh?
and that there's no
But
other
There's
debt.
a little firehouse loan, right?
Yeah.
It started at 500,000 and I can't recall.
I thought that was an interfund thing between the police and or is that a whole other thing?
That's a whole other thing. Well, that's the part too with the public safety fund. That's been kind of a hot button item here for years, trying to figure out who owes what. When the firehouse went in, and
They took the police's money.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
that was
they
kind
do.
of thing.
There's an easy way to fix that, because that was development impact fees, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's the only way they could have paid for it. So the easiest
Yeah,
way to
you're
fix
exactly
that
right.
is to simply, because it's all public safety development impact fees, and the city council can spend that either on police or fire. So as we move forward, in order to make the police department whole, you simply designate all of the development impact fees for public safety to the police department as you move forward. And eventually
Until
they'll be
they just
paid back.
back.
Yep,
Yeah.
and that's,
Go back to 50/50. or
yep,
whatever.
it's and the fire department doesn't need it anyway. They have 2 stations.
Right.
They've got all the capital improvements that they needed.
That would be.
So they're good.
That's a really good one, 'cause I know
That seems like the
more than
easiest
that.
way to do it.
Yeah, I know, it's been,
Yeah.
it's just been a nagging thing in the background for 10 years.
Ever since they built it.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So.
We need to do, well, the salary splits. So I do want to talk about that, because that's part of the auditing process, and it's part of the restricted funds. So we split a lot of our staff salaries between different functions. So whether it's general fund, or the gas tax fund, or the wastewater fund, and it has to be a defensible allocation of salary and benefits to each of those funds. So if I spend 20% of my time working on wastewater, then I can allocate 20% of my salary and benefits to the wastewater fund, and they can be charged. And that is auditable, and it is defensible. But if I spend 20% of my time in wastewater, and we charge wastewater 50% of my time, so that the general fund is not as impacted, that's not defensible.
Right.
And that's not okay. And so we have changed some of the salary splits, which is what I call them, the allocations of funds. For instance, the city council had 100% of their, not that you guys make a lot of money, but you had 100% of your salary and benefits were going to administration, all within the general fund, even though you spend a rather significant amount of your time dealing with the enterprise funds, like the gas tax and the wastewater fund. So it went both ways. Some salaries were reduced, in terms of their split from the wastewater and gas tax fund, like mine, and some were increased, like the council's. At the end of the day, we believe that it's more defensible and it's more accurate, an actual accurate reflection of how much time everybody spends in each of those budget units.
And we've been doing that, I think most years we've done that fairly accurately. I mean, we did the conversations. I know there were years when we were spending a lot more time on wastewater just because.
And that's legitimate. I mean, if you really are,
Yeah.
then you can
At least it's
allocate
my
more.
time, I could think it's even defensible because I
Yep.
spend the time in the office and what's going on.
Right. So we've tweaked it. We think it's better. But the other reason to do it is so that you have a more accurate reflection of what are your general fund
Right,
costs?
sure.
What does it really cost you to run just the general fund?
Mhm.
And all the administrative activities that don't have any other special revenue source. The gas tax fund we're gonna need to talk about that fund a little bit more later on. That fund continues to lose money every year because more people drive electric cars, which don't get
Yeah,
charged any
right.
gas tax. They get charged $100 on their
Mhm.
vehicle license registration fee. But cars are more fuel efficient, people are buying electric or not driving, and the gas tax fund continues to shrink.
And with COVID too, I would suspect that.
It was even worse.
Drastically restricted.
It was awful. And that's when they came up with ARPA and other ways to sort of compensate cities for those huge losses.
Well, they passed, they were trying to make it to where they're running people by the mile about how they're gonna monitor you. That would be the craziest thing. That just seems like a awful.
Well, they did it in Oregon without any sort of stress at all, but somehow in California, we can't figure out how to revamp the gas tax system. It needs to be changed. Yeah, we're not getting anywhere near enough money. And so the capital improvement budget, we don't have fully developed for you today, and I apologize, that really should have been done. But we're so overwhelmed with trying to get you an operating budget that, but we will have to get to that before October 19th. And we may have another finance committee meeting ahead of that to sit down and go over that. We don't have a lot of money for capital projects. The wastewater fund is way underfunded. The $41 someone
Yeah, it's 40/70, but yeah.
is probably one of the lowest rates in the state. And it doesn't allow for any money to be set aside for any significant capital project. It
What
just-
is our capital improvement sewer thing? 'Cause we do have a fund for that, right?
Yeah,
We
$8 a
do.
month, yeah. It's $8 a month.
$8 a month.
Yeah.
Comments.
But at that pace, it's just not, it's not in today's dollars.
Right.
I mean, it just doesn't buy you anything, really. So we are recommending that two things happen with the wastewater fund. One, that we do a wastewater fee study and see how our fee compares to other agencies and how it compares to our operating and capital costs that we know we have and that we need. And to ultimately bring that to the council for a decision point on whether to change those fees at some point next year. The second piece is that we bill our customers every 30 days, 31 days, for a sewer bill. That requires, you should just be here the day they do it.
Takes a whole day.
It's a circus in here. So they print out 800 something, I don't know, 900 bills through a machine, and they have to literally go to the post office to deliver them. And it is an enormous amount of work. And we only have 2 people that do that, with an army of volunteers, which are great. They're great people, but it takes like 8 volunteers just to do the monthly billing. But it costs the city in postage and in labor time and materials for envelopes and paper. It costs us a huge amount of money. There's a much more efficient way to do that. There's 2 options. One, which the vast majority of cities do, is they just make it part of the property tax bill, and it's listed separately, and it tells you what your sewer charges are for that 6-month period that because you get 2 property tax bills every year, so each one would have a 6-month sewer bill attached to it. That's one way. Another way is simply to bill our residents quarterly or in some other incremental piece of time that's not every month, to save a huge amount of money and time just sending out the bills. But it also means tracking whether people pay their bills or not every 30 days instead of every quarter or every 6 months or whatever. So we can get to that later. The wastewater committee would need to look at it first, and make some recommendations to the council, but the way we're doing it is incredibly labor intensive.
Because I know too, even like I pay online my bills and the email and it's told me it's being paid. And a lot of people have gone that way. I don't know, I think it's probably around 20 to 30% maybe. I'm not sure who's paying online versus, but I still get a bill. I still get the sewer newsletter, which is great. But I mean, if I got it electronically, it wouldn't be any less great.
We're working on that part. Kenna and Andrea have been great in trying to figure out. So for the folks that are okay with automatic bill payment or paying it online, technically they don't need a piece of paper in the mail. We're going to try to convert all that to an email saying thank you, we got your payment, and not send any paper out. The only trick is it'd be great to send them the newsletter.
Right.
So we just have to figure out how to do that through email. So we get a batch email list. And
Isn't
just
it on the
send-
website?
Hmm?
Isn't it on the website?
We can post it on the website
Yeah,
and
you
people
post
can
it on
go
the
to it that
website.
way, and we can send them an email, hey, our newsletter's on the website. That's an easier, much easier way to do it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know the only part that's always missing is it's kind of a social affair to put the sewer bill together. I mean, it has been in time memorial, and it's kind of it's more of a.
It's
hangout
it's a
time.
hard transition.
It
Like,
is, yeah.
there are some cities that half of all of their customers come in person to pay
Yeah.
their water bill.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty common here. We people come drop it off. And it's
Half.
the part of it, I
Half.
mean, it's kind of that balance
Yeah.
between, it really is a community thing. That's kind of the neat part about it. It actually does build community. People meet staff downtown, they hang out here, but also it's at a great expense to the business itself, I guess you can.
Well, and so let's talk about that for a second, because Kenna and Andrea, just those two individuals, their functions include wastewater account, dealing with the billing, invoicing, late payments, collections, all of that. The front counter is people walk in, that's part of their task. Building inspection, permitting, helping Michael with paperwork to do that, that's still all part of their function. And somewhere in there, helping the city manager, because I don't have any direct staff support at all right now, except if I lean on them and Janice. I'm leaning on everybody, which is why the administrative analyst would work directly for me, and I could assign tasks to that person to free up the two women up front to do all of the other administrative tasks that are related not just to the wastewater fund, but just dealing with the public up front as they come in person or by phone, building inspections, just opening the mail. There's all of these committee agendas that have to be posted. There's committees that have to be attended, Parks and Rec and Planning, and now we've added a new committee for special districts. So there's all, and that's so the clerk function. And Janice only works part-time, so that's not a full-time function that we get there. She works very hard, but she's overwhelmed because she comes in for the 20 hours a week and it's just nonstop.
Right.
And so the administrative analyst will greatly help to deal with all of that stuff, helping the council with just, booking reservations and helping the council with anything you need help with, just getting information to you. All of that is being done by individuals who are trying to do all this other stuff related to the gas tax, wastewater fund, building inspection, police. We get police department, 911 emergencies, they come to the front counter at City Hall because there's nobody on the police department side all day long. Sometimes there's somebody there,
Yeah.
sometimes there's not. So an in-person 911 call is rather unique, right? I've got a problem, and they're standing there telling you what it is, and you have to respond right away. You can't say, oh, well, we'll get to you in an hour. No, it doesn't work that way. So we're trying to deal with that too. And so all of this, we feel, will make everything run so much smoother. Getting the agenda to you on time, so Thursdays instead of Fridays, we've been able to do that, but it takes a lot of work and effort on our part to do that. So that's kind of the big picture overview of, I'm happy to say that the city is probably in a better position right now than it's been in a long time, and that's great. But we still have the challenge with capital monies, and we don't have enough. in any, either in the general fund or in the wastewater fund or in the gas, we don't have enough capital money in any of those funds to do the things that I know you want to do and that need to be done. So we're going to have another meeting to specifically talk about capital projects. And that's kind of where we are. The city manager salary is incorrect in the packet, and we'll change that. It's listed as 80-something thousand a year, and while that would be really nice, it's not. It's just not right. We'll fix it.
Cool, yeah. Any thoughts? Questions? I mean, I know like this with the borrowing, I always like to have a detailed discussion about that. I'd like to see what I little bit, what we're going to do there. That's kind of one of those things where like it's that whole list, and some of it you probably just knock off in one fell swoop, I would say, and you figure out that we had figured something out a while back, but also didn't carry out for other, right.
Well, here's a suggestion. We need to tweak a few things. The balance is going to be a little bit different when we fix the city manager's salary and fix a few other minor things. And we'll get you a hard, 100% accurate, here's the cash balance.
Mm-hmm.
And then the council on October 5th, which is Tuesday, can decide maybe. I mean, that's just another discussion. There's no action that needs to be taken, but you could talk about, well, how do we handle this list? And you'll know exactly how much money you have if you want to use it that way. And you could pay off all of the loan, one or two or however many, and leave it wide open for discussion. There may be some wiggle room there.
Yeah. And I guess my other broader point is that if some of these are a little more pressure to get them paid back for whatever reason, I'm not sure if that's the case or not. But
Is there any that are more like,
pressing?
Well,
they don't care, just as long
I
as
mean,
they make an attempt?
that's, I suppose, depending on your perspective, I mean, it's a very subjective sort of question and answer,
It
right?
is, I know, yeah.
I mean, if you're Ken Mackey, you would say Measure M is really important,
Yeah.
and if you're Todd, you're gonna say, well, gee, the sewer fund's important.
But legally, there's nothing?
No.
Okay.
No. No, legally, you just have to come up with a
Make
payback
Make an
plan,
attempt to
Yeah.
correct it.
payback plan with
We had a
interest.
plan, just to execute it.
Yeah, execute it this time.
Just have to execute it, yeah. But no, legally, there's no, like, you have to pay this back now versus no. It's purely up to the council.
And then as far as the unrestricted reserves, I mean, you said 5% is kind of standard and normal for the city.
Well, most cities have around 10 to 15%,
Yeah.
unless you're Mill Valley, and then you have like 200,000% because you're so
Right.
filthy
Yeah.
rich. But
Right.
we actually have 25%, which
Okay.
is very high. Now, little tiny cities usually have pretty good reserves because it's a numbers thing, right?
Right.
So it's $800,000.
Economies of scale. Kind of.
Which sounds like a lot of money, but in an emergency, the problem is little
Yeah.
tiny cities are still gonna spend probably more than a really large city would spend on an emergency event as a proportion of their budget. And that's the problem we get into.
And it's hard to forecast, because I'm kind of thinking, looking back of what we lacked back in those early lean years, how much do we need that we didn't have, is how we got here. I mean, looking at that, I'm not sure, and then it's, again, the economy changes how it wants to, it may not be as catastrophic or maybe more, but at the same time, want to be responsible enough to be able to have something put aside so that we're not, 25% maybe fair, I don't know.
It's very fair, and the dilemma is 25% of City of Sacramento's budget is
Almost.
$90 million.
Yeah.
So, in an emergency, if the city has to do something,
Yeah.
they've got 90 million bucks, and that, they're probably not gonna spend more than that. Our problem is, we have $800,000.
Yeah.
And just in terms of real dollars, it's a little bit of a challenge, which is why we have a much higher percentage. Most cities have around 10 to 15%. So I think we're in great shape. I wouldn't go lower,
Okay.
only because it's a hard number, it's $800,000.
Well, and too, I know like part of what we anticipated, part of the payback was anticipated because of we knew we were growing. Housing is definitely going in. We're a desirable location. That really hasn't shifted at all in the last 10 years. It's been slow fairly incremental. I mean, we kind of knew that going into this. The sewer plant, I mean, it's been kind of in a sweet spot, you know, it's like it's not overrun, but it's also not, so we're not using 50% capacity, so we're using it pretty efficiently, it's kind of a bigger idea there. So that's a good thing, because, you know, if you get to overbuild anyway, while you're backfilling all those years, getting it to that 80% or whatever it ends up being. But now we're in a dry year too, which creates a whole nother thing, obviously, but then we're looking to the future, when do we have to, you know, hit that next point, or when do we have to expand, because I know the AWA's looking to expand, and the amount of volume that we need here is starting to increase, they're seeing that, so.
Yeah, I do think that when we do our capital budget meeting, we need to talk about the development impact fee budgets and discuss, because there's some very complicated law around how you spend that money, how you take it in, how you spend it, where it gets budgeted. And we need a better, more specific plan that more details how that is happening. And the auditor, actually, we're going to talk to the auditor this morning for the final time before they issue their 18-19 audit report. So the management report that goes with that audit, we should get in the next couple days.
Oh, good, very good.
Or I think by Tuesday, right?
We have to talk to him, so.
Yeah, we might get it by Tuesday
Okay.
before the council meeting. In any event, it's 99% completed.
Okay, cool.
And what they're required to do is to not only audit all of the operating and special funds, but to then render an opinion on how the city operates and how it manages its money, whether it has adequate separation of powers and duties related to accounts payable and accounts receivable and cash transactions, and all of the things that we do in the finance department. So they will audit the fully 18-19 year. They will render what's called a management report, which will explain their particular view and opinion of how the city operates its finance division, whether they're doing all the proper things, whether there's enough separation of powers and duties, whether cash transactions are being properly recorded, whether bills are being paid in the right accounts, whether development impact fees are being received and put in the right funds for ultimately the right purposes. You get development impact fees for traffic impacts, you get fees for public safety, for parks and facilities. You even get development impact fees for general administration, which would be this room, public space. But all of those things are separate. All of those things have to be tracked separately. And when you come up with a project that you want to do, then you transfer that development impact fee revenue to an operating/capital operating budget, and then you spend that money. So we'll get into all of that. We've got to have a more specific, more detailed explanation for the council on how all of that takes place. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because right now we're bringing in a lot of development impact fee revenue. For a city this size, we're bringing in a very significant amount. And what I don't want to have happen is, oh, we can borrow that money and put it in the general fund and then have another $3 million that we owe back to special funds. No, we cannot do that. And I'm sure the council does not want to do that. We already owe $3 million.
That's only, that one just started one time, right?
What's that?
Concur's the one that started that, but no one continued to keep doing that?
No, as soon as as soon as I came to my attention, we slowed down what we could, because I mean, we were going bankrupt basically.
Right.
And we were in a really bad spot. That's why we retired 5 of the key staff. And part of that payback was that we had, to get them to retire, we gave them a retirement program. We had to fund that though. So
Right.
funded that for 3 years. Once that funding stopped, that was when the payback was supposed to begin. We had a plan in place, it just never got executed. At least that was my understanding of it. That's what I recall. I mean, it's been a number of years, but that was kind of the thought behind that, because we had this bunch of money that it didn't look like it was getting better for a while, and all of a sudden the budget greened up a little bit, but we were still kind of in a recession. And as we kind of climbed out of it, that was kind of the idea behind it, was that we'd have that little space there, because that's not being paid and will not be funded, and the money would go and begin to pay these things off. It was There was some, I may have notes buried somewhere, but I have to figure it out. That's what I recall. I could be wrong there. That's what I remember. One other thought too on Howard Park. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if it'd further complicate things, it'd make it better or worse. But Acra, it is a regional park, and so we have some options there as far as how we do maintenance out there. It is possible, Acra does have an employee or two that does park maintenance. I'm not sure what their work rates are, if that's something, I mean, I don't know if we want another employee that wouldn't be, I guess they'd be under COD, you know, realistically. But I don't know if that would be something that the city could look at or
I
not.
think we should give it back to the picnic association that it used to be.
Yeah,
They maintained it for free.
yeah. Well,
The city had nothing to do with it.
yeah, really, you know.
And
I
it
mean,
was
I know-
beautiful back then.
Yeah. Well, the problem is it's like we have soccer and baseball, and they pay a pittance of what really needs to, what, the amount of money, resources we spend out there, and it's not that great. I mean, we just can't, between the squirrels and the grass, it's just this constant battle, and we got more infrastructure out there too. Do more playgrounds, a nicer playground, the dog park, horse ring, someone takes care of itself, sort of ish. But I know. I know there's some things there. And then
Yeah,
the
well, now we
softball-
have a tennis court and we've
Right.
got softball fields maybe coming in. I mean, the amount of infrastructure is increasing, which means the maintenance is increasing, which means the overhead is,
Mhm.
you know, the overhead to the city for that park is actually pretty high, even with the money we collect in rents and
It's not
leases.
much. I
It's
know,
it's
it's
just not,
very-
it's not coming anywhere close to covering our costs.
Well, we really don't, I mean, it's not really designed to be a revenue generator necessarily.
No.
It hasn't been. I mean, like the skate park, people don't know this probably, but there are kids, they have for years, that park is famous in Santa Cruz because people come up here and they make videos out of it.
It's a great skate park.
The kids, it's funny, I'm like, oh, Santa Cruz are making movies. I'm like, they used to camp behind it, you wouldn't know it, but they were camping behind there.
Yeah.
But that was kind of going on, but we got a lot of maintenance done out there. This golf course is actually on a little app, I guess. I see guys out there playing on the last one, and, oh yeah, found it on the app, so they're out there playing disc golf because of that. And baseball, softball, there, the softball thing comes in, that's a whole nother opportunity, maybe that matures a little bit.
In the budget detail, which starts right after page 25, those are all the funds that the city has. And we've broken it down, first is the revenue funds, and then the expenditure funds start with the city council fund and go all the way through all the budget units. Those are your typical line item expenses, salaries and benefits, and operating costs, materials and supplies. We are, made a few tweaks. We put a lot of stuff in general services budget because those are citywide expenses and they need to be managed by one individual rather than 8 or 9 different people. And so what was happening is things that we could buy in bulk, like computer, software, hardware, office supplies, were being bought separately by each department at lower increments for higher costs. And that's just not efficient. And it's also very difficult to track how much money the city spends on those particular items because every department was spending them separately. So we put just a few things into that general services budget, which, oh, here it is, it's on page 18. So we combined all of the software, network services, IT services, and communications, office expenses are all in that one fund on page 18, which I will oversee and make sure that the monies are being spent fairly by all the departments. The IT function, we have an RFP for IT services out on the street right now. We have a sworn officer who is functioning as our IT in-house person, which is he's terrific. He's extremely well qualified to do it. He's extremely knowledgeable about IT stuff, but he's also supposed to work for the police department full-time. And so we're trying to sort all of that out. We'll see what we get when we get responses back to the IT RFP, and we'll see what services that a private company can provide. And we may try, we still need day-to-day on-site service. That's a critical function that has to happen. Computers break down, both hardware and software, there has to be an immediate response for that. John's been great with that. So we haven't totally figured that piece of it out, but we will, and we'll come back to council with some thoughts on it. The only other really big difference in the budgets is what we're calling a equipment and fleet maintenance budget. And it's a brand new budget. What page is that
It's
one?
that one right there. The title didn't change. It's that one.
Oh, okay. And so,
What page is that?
19.
oh, you're right, it's on page 19. And so the reason for that is similar to the reason for all that other stuff. So gas, fuel was being bought by separate departments at separate gas stations with separate credit cards for small increments. And every department was tracking their own fuel costs, their own maintenance costs for vehicles and equipment, using whatever garage or mechanic they felt they needed to use, and buying their own brand new cars or equipment based on, gee, we have some money, let's go get something. And what I'm suggesting and recommending is that we create this equipment fund and do what the vast majority of cities do, which is create a replacement fund for vehicles and equipment citywide, so that if say the police department needs a new patrol car, okay, when do you need it? How much does it cost? Well, it costs 50 grand, fully loaded with all the bells and whistles and sirens and computers and everything. Okay, when do you need it? 5 years from now? Okay, so divide by 5, give me that much money every year, I'll put it in a fleet replacement fund, I'll invest your money through our city treasurer. And then when you're ready to retire your vehicle, you will utilize the fleet replacement fund monies to do that. And right now what's happening is departments are taking a $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 hit to buy a vehicle and sacrificing the rest of their operating budget to do it without any sort of fund that is appropriately set up. Because we, through an audit process, we have to depreciate all of our equipment anyway. That's a requirement. So if the depreciation schedule is 10 years for a pickup truck, give us 1/10 of that money every year. We'll set it aside, and then with interest earned, we'll probably get a new truck in 9 years instead of 10 years, or 10 years, and then we have more interest. That is difficult to do if you don't have the appropriate funding levels to do it, but if you do, I strongly recommend that we do that, because otherwise, two things happen. We don't have enough money to buy a new piece of equipment or a vehicle, and it breaks down, and we spend huge amounts of monies to maintain very old equipment, and it's very wasteful way to spend money. Old street sweepers, you know, especially the heavy equipment, can get very expensive to repair. And we keep it way longer than we should because we can't buy a new one, and that's actually penny wise and pound foolish. But if you set up a replacement fund and try to stick to that schedule, so, you know, if a backhoe lasts 20 years, great, start funding 1/20th every year, plus interest, boom, you can buy a new backhoe in 20 years. But it takes discipline. You have to have the money every year, you have to put it in there, you have to invest it well, and, you know, but if the equipment lasts longer than you predicted, you don't have to spend the money, you just wait. You wait until you really need to replace it, and then boom, you're good to go. And you don't spend huge amounts of money maintaining really old equipment that will be worthless when you surplus it. That's the other thing. So like if you surplus a piece of equipment that's 20 years old, but is in relatively good condition, you surplus it, you take that money, put it into the replacement fund, and that just becomes an added source of revenue for that fund. And so overall, you come out way ahead financially. It's just much more efficient way to use your money. So we'll try to get there. I'm gonna recommend, that's one thing that's not shown here, is I'd like to recommend a seed of, say, $30,000 into the equipment replacement fund, just to get it started. And then the departments have to contribute from that point. So that's a new fund, and the other reason to do it is so that, and I'm gonna ask Todd to oversee that fund, because he spends the most on equipment and maintenance. And it needs to be controlled by one person instead of 5 different people.
Right.
Because when 5 different people spend money from the same line item, it's sort of a race to see who can spend it first,
Yeah.
which of course is not a good way to manage money. So by having one person oversee the budget, talk to the other, it's mostly police, fire, and public works. And between the 3 of them, they always have gotten along, they've always worked very well together. This is just a way to make sure that the whole fund is tracked and that there's one person accountable to that fund, and that we do the best we can in investing the money in that fund as well. So that's the newest, that's the only really new budget unit that we have. The rest looks very similar to previous years.
One, in the weeds a little bit, where do we get our fuel at? I know towns, it's expensive.
I was getting into Garco and Jackson.
When they get it? Yeah.
They go to Jackson a lot.
Pacific Pride's still up in Jackson,
Yeah.
some flyers are still going up to Jackson.
Yeah, and there, I guess there's no savings if we put a tank in town here or something, it'd be probably.
Used to be, but now with
I know.
underground tanking rules, it's.
I
a
know,
nightmare
I know.
now. You can do above ground tanks.
Yeah.
It's very, some cities have done that.
Cause I don't know, or there's a way, cause I know the gas in town is saying if we could work a deal with them or something, maybe. I know we spent a lot of gas going down the hill.
Yeah, we probably could look into that. Chevron's gonna close
That's why I heard for 3
for
months.
2 months or 3 months, which will probably turn into 4 months.
Shell's for sale, why don't we buy Shell?
Is it really?
Yeah, 1 point something million.
Well, let's buy 2 of them.
Shell wants $1 million.
Yeah.
Can you, if you pony up $500,000, the city could probably find the other.
Yeah, there you go, yeah. I dig around so they got in my backyard. It's buried somewhere, I don't know.
Locals get 50% off.
There you go, that would be.
There you
Now
go.
you're talking, see?
I wonder if we could have a special contractual agreement though with Chevron or one of the local, we might be.
Oh,
I mean-
I could see.
Cause they spend a lot of gas going down the hill and it's only 8 miles, it's 15
Well,
round
I
trip.
bitched at John about the Alpha.
No, I don't like it either.
He says it's actually that they save money.
I know they
said,
do.
You wasted more money going up there. He goes, actually,
No,
no,
I
it
don't.
does save money.
It's about a
It's just
gallon.
wear and tear on the car.
Well,
What about
that's-
time though?
And time,
That's the
exactly.
thing. It's,
How
I mean,
much
it's
time?
all that.
It's an hour by the time they go up there and buy their donuts and get the gas and come back.
You get it. Hey, you gotta talk to people, man.
Raspberry jelly.
Yeah, that is,
Yeah.
it
Did
just-
you guys have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think we covered it.
Yeah, I've been doing this so long, it's like it's just all up in my head.
Well, I appreciate your guys' hard work, really do. It's a pleasure, it's been lots of it, it's good. Very good.
Okay, that's all I
All
have.
right?
Do we need to take any public comment on any of
No,
this?
we did the program.
So when are you planning the next one?
So on October 5th, we'll do this very similar presentation to the whole council.
Just update council. And
Yeah.
then there'll be one more.
October 19th to adopt the final
Okay.
budget. Yeah.
And we discussed briefly the 2018 audit, basically we're just waiting. So
Yeah.
Have a special meeting for that and then we'll get on this.
Yeah, so the management report, we will do in closed session. That's a confidential document. And it's just so that we can understand how we operate and what changes we might need to make. So I'm hoping to do that on Tuesday, if not certainly on the 19th, for the closed session on that. And accept that 18-19 audit, hopefully on the 19th.
Okay,
And the 19-20 audit is already underway.
very good.
Yeah,
Well, we're preparing for it. They'll officially start it.
yeah, but that'll go a lot quicker.
It'll be a lot faster.
The problem they're running into now is it's audit season for every city.
Right.
And so, and there's like, in every other part of this economy, there's not enough auditors, not enough people working.
Yeah,
So everything's
It's
slowing
everywhere,
down.
it's crazy.
Everywhere.
So with them too, so what's our contract with them, you know, by chance?
Dollar amount?
No, not the dollar amount, a year, how long we have them.
They just started.
Yeah. I
And
don't remember
we
if
just
it's
hired them
multi-year.
2 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember if it's multi-year.
Usually the auditors get like year contracts.
Yeah, it seemed like we renewed it annually or something like that. Every year, that season we'd have it
I
annually.
haven't
It would
seen a
come up and
contract, but with how many audits and we're trying to catch up, I would imagine.
Correct, yeah.
Multi-year and not annual
Yeah.
bids.
That's kind of what I assumed. I just want to make sure
Yeah.
if that needs to be on the agenda, that gets on before we get to the.
We're aware of the next ones, I'm pretty sure,
Right.
but we'll verify.
Yeah, I think it's 3 years. I don't know, quote me. I'm not-
The only requirement legally is that every 7 years we change auditors.
Right.
Just so that, you know,
I think we carried the last auditor over just because of all the other complexities. I mean, we had a huge changeover. We just need some consistency somewhere. That was the where, so. But yeah, okay. Very good.
okay,
Anything else, guys? All right, let it close, meeting adjourned.
thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Probably for